So leading into my third of 4 motos last weekend, my KTM took a little bit to start, which is super unusual. Ran great for the whole moto, and then when we went to load it up, nothing. So I'm really hoping this is a quick, easy fix, but this is a 2022 350 XCF factory edition with just over 20 hours on it. Gonna get her cleaned up and see what we can find out. So since that wash clip was filmed, I have been slaving away at this bike for 2 days. I'm gonna run you through everything I've done. So the first thing I did was change the spark plug. The reason I did this is because with my last oil change, I realized that I overfilled it by 100 milliliters. From my understanding, excess oil can cause a buildup in oil pressure, allowing oil to get by those piston rings and in turn foul a spark plug. I wouldn't think that a few hours on the motor with too much oil would cause a catastrophic failure, but it is certainly a possible reason for failure. I checked and then removed the inline fuel filter in case maybe it was clogged. I pulled out the fuel injector and blew it out with compressed air. I built a makeshift pressure gauge and made sure the fuel pump was working. I bought all of the components to make this at Ace Hardware. This is a simple pressure gauge, a couple adapters, piece of tubing. I removed the Etiker clamp from the fuel connector and put this on that gauge. That plugged directly into the tank. I hit the starter and read 50 PSI, which means the fuel pump is performing as it should. I tried a different ECU. I checked the valves. They are all in spec. I changed the air filter. Here is the old air filter. Ignore all of the big pieces of dirt because this was actually in the garbage and got extra dirt in it. But all of the dust you can see coming through right here is certainly an issue. Now this one's interesting because I've been cycling through the same 5 or 6 air filters for about 4 years now. None of them show any damage, but I did start thinking this season, you know, is it time to replace those? This air filter is certainly dirty. It was a dusty day at the motocross track, but I've seen plenty of air filters get this dirty in the past, and I've never actually had dirt get straight through one like that. So I will be replacing all of my air filters with some freshies from No Toil. So while the layer of dust in the air boot was very minimal, we all know that any dirt in the engine is a major no-go and is a very likely cause of failure. I did an oil change and checked the screen. There were some significant metal shavings on the oil screen. So before I wasn't even able to bump the bike, but just now I was able to bump start the bike. It ran like crap and then immediately started pouring oil out of the crankcase breather hose. So this is why I'm led to believe that the piston rings are failing. Not ideal on a 20-hour bike, not ideal at the start of the race season, but guess what? If my biggest problem in life right now is my almost brand new dirt bike not starting, life's pretty good. So, trying to take deep breaths. But anyway, that's where we're at. So the next step is to lock this thing at top dead center and perform a leak down test to make sure I have engine problems before tearing this open. But it's looking like a high likelihood it's piston related. So KTMs have this really nice feature where you can actually lock the crankshaft at top dead center. You simply remove this bolt and there is a notch in the crankshaft where that bolt gets reinserted. You just remove that washer and reinstall the bolt and that crank is locked. At this point, I like to disconnect the starter so that I can't accidentally try to turn the engine over. The leak down tester is showing close to 80% leakage. And if I put my hand right here, I've got tons of air coming out of that crankcase breather. And my Motion Pro instructions here say 23% up, meaning the engine is in very poor condition. Consider rebuilding engine before proceeding. And you know, based on everything that's going on, I suppose that makes sense. Poor girl. Well, folks, this is about the last thing I expected to be doing with my freshie 20 hours in, but let's rip her open. Well guys, I've pulled the cylinder off and what I see in here is nothing. Nothing at all. Alright, so a little further diagnosis and a little bit more time thinking. It seems to me like this upper ring is kind of seized in the piston somewhere around here. Being this far into the engine already and having a hunch that there was a ring issue, I decided that it was time to remove the piston so that I could inspect it a little bit more thoroughly. Okay, so for all my diagnosis, here's what I think's happened. So this compression ring is supposed to have a gap that is less than 0.4 millimeters. The gap is there and it's visible. When I pulled that ring off of the piston, it was very tight and I would say stuck on one portion of the piston. What I am thinking is the ring came unseated, and instead of having that gap sub 0.4 millimeters, I think the ring slid off center and fully closed the gap. And of course, there's no way for me to really demonstrate this, but if that is true, and this was closed, that would mean that air and oil would have been able to bypass a significant portion of the ring. I keep thinking about that leak down test and if I could have screwed it up somehow, but I'm staring at this cylinder thinking about exactly how a leak down test works conceptually. Air was being forced through here, straight into the cylinder, with the only thing to prevent it from going through being the piston and rings. And air was undoubtedly coming up through here and through that breather hose. At this point, I gave Mike at Deja Moto a call, who you've heard about plenty in my videos. He's pretty much an expert in all things moto. So he came over to lend another set of eyes. And as it turns out, I think my theory was right. Here's what we found. So Mikey just left, and I think we figured it out. He came over with a monocle, so we were able to super closely inspect the grooves in the piston where that compression ring was sticking, and there was some super weird buildup of something. This is that buildup. Mikey took the piston ring and was scraping that out, and he just kept wiping it right here. So it was a very fine residue that was enough to cause that ring to stick. So I think my theory had to be correct. There's really not much other option. The ring got stuck and compressed all the way, causing tons of blow-by on one side of that piston ring. So the good news is, this really shouldn't cost me much. I need to order a gasket and a circuit clip and start reassembling this thing. We also inspected the boot, and Mikey agreed that dirt was not the cause of this issue. Nothing got through the throttle body and there's no signs of dirt damage. And now I'm going to admit to you what I think the root of the problem was. Of course, there's no guarantee, but I've got a pretty good hunch. I'm not proud to admit this, but I think it's important to show my mistakes. Just before we left for the motocross race, I was doing a super quick oil change and realized I didn't have enough oil. I only had 500 milliliters of KTM oil left. So I said, it's just one weekend. This'll work. I mixed my KTM oil with my Ducati oil. I figured they're both synthetic 50 weight oils, should be fine. Now, no guarantee that is the cause of the failure. I do not know how mixing oils works or what the properties of oil are. I'm not an expert in oil, but given I'm having this super odd issue on a 21-hour KTM 350, I think it's pretty likely I done goofed. At this point, while waiting for parts to arrive in the mail, there was nothing left to do but head out to Pipestone, Montana for our 3rd annual Pipestone Kegger. My friend Monty was gracious enough to let me borrow his CRF-250 while my KTM is down. I had an absolute blast ripping that thing and took very good care of it. Oh! A couple keg stands and a hangover later, Monday morning arrived and I was back in the shop wrenching on the KTM. At this point, I cleaned all of the carbon buildup off of my piston with carb cleaner and a brass brush and got that thing looking like new. And Mikey let me borrow his ring compressor. I have never installed a piston using one of these. He warned me to be very careful when sliding that piston through the ring compressor into the cylinder in order to not damage the rings or piston, and I slipped. Oh. Well, that was supposed to be a smooth process and I just yeeted it in there. Upon further inspection of the piston, I did indeed damage it right where the compression ring sits. At this point, I'm kind of done getting frustrated. You live and you learn. I overnighted a Wiseco piston from Rocky Mountain in hopes of still getting this thing back together in time for my race. I checked the ring end gap and made sure that everything was in spec from my manual, and then I installed the piston the old-fashioned way into the cylinder this time because I did not want to chance ruining another one. Don't be fooled, the piston circlip took me a lot longer than that to install, but I used the KTM tool to finish it off. That tool is designed specifically for the KTM circlips, so it didn't really work exactly with the Wiseco one, but I was able to use it to get that last little bit. Now, the part I always struggle with is getting that throttle body back over the cylinder head. This took me quite some time, but the method I ended up using worked pretty well. Probably not factory recommended, but I took a Rabicon tire iron and I placed it here and got leverage against the frame to get that throttle body back over the cylinder head. From here, I continued with engine reassembly. Getting timing set was not difficult at all. It's something I used to stress about and struggle with, but I've gotten a lot better at it, and it really was pretty easy getting this thing back together. As soon as I had the engine buttoned back up, I cracked a beer. I figured I probably didn't need a beer while I was still working with the real technical side of things, but once it was just a matter of bolting things back on and torquing them to spec, I figured after all this hard work, I deserved a nice cold IPA. Once the bike was back together, I was a little nervous to fire it up, so I cleaned the shop and detailed the bike before I finally decided to hit the starter button. Here goes. She's gonna fire right up. She's gonna fire right up. There we go. Heard the tensioner take away that slack. I was scared there for 2 seconds. I was really nervous there for 2 seconds. Woo! Let's go! I am absolutely ecstatic right now. It looks like we're going racing. I'm gonna go ride this thing tomorrow and make sure all is good, but she is firing up super quick now. Check it out. Absolutely stoked. Lots of hurdles to jump through, but managed to get it done. The bike is back up and running. She's back, baby, she's back. And I can't wait to ride her again. Well, shakedown ride went unbelievably well. Bike ran perfect, fired right up every time. I feel great about it. It's honestly quite refreshing to see this bike dirty again. That said, about 20 minutes after I got home, they canceled the race. This course hasn't been raced in many years, and I guess if it rains, it is pretty much impossible to get in and out with vehicles and especially trailers. So they rescheduled it for June 10th and 11th, which means I'm headed down to Salt Lake City to watch the final Supercross with my friends. Can't be too upset. The bike's up and running again, and I'm gonna have a kick-ass weekend. But the ride this morning was on absolute hero dirt, rode some incredible single track. If you'd like to see just some raw single track of me ripping this bike for the break-in, you can click here once I post that. I will also link that down in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching. Click that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Leave a like rating if you enjoyed this video. Leave me a comment, and I'll see you guys soon with another one.